lifetime pensions. It is actually, because this is where you close the door. Because without this, the horse has bolted.
Exactly. So that's why the purpose of sounding an alarm is that there should be some kind of remedial response. After the break, Uche asks, what is the value of the Nigerian life? Now, that sounds like a rhetorical question. I can't wait to hear Uche.
5 panelists, 5 topical issues, no holds barred.
For me, it's not knowledge that's lacking. It's that greed. It's that mentality where you feel you deserve to take your own and take it infinitely and let everybody else just manage however they will manage.
We're almost becoming hardwired to try and cheat. I would, suggest that we begin to hold our leaders accountable.
There was a time in this country when things actually work.
I don't think that any organization should be above the law. And I think one of the challenges we have in this country is about governance across the board.
But what I'm saying is that it doesn't really affect us in Nigeria. That's
It does.
I don't know what we can do if the system is already corrupted.
We've been warned as a continent of the influx of the Chinese. If you don't repay your debt, they will just colonize you. It is a rhetorical question, Libs, because come to think of it, why should I have to ask the question in the first place? What is the value of the Nigerian life? Every day we hear of killings, kidnappings, fatal motor accidents, and so on, with hardly a word from our government. Even if they do say something, it's usually to utter empty mechanical words such as, no stone will be left unturned to bring the perpetrators to book. How many times have we heard that, and how many times have the perpetrators been brought to book? Hardly ever, if at all. Instead, we have a senator sponsoring a bill to create an agency to rehabilitate and absorb repentant Boko Haram members back into society, and worse, back into our army. Nigerians lose their lives every day plying our terrible roads, yet nothing is done about those very roads. Relatives and friends cry and mourn, but soon move on, as they know, just as the rest of us do, that no amount of tears will move the government to action. It is each man for himself. Never have we known the level of kidnappings we're experiencing today. Some roads are no longer viable as they have been taken over by bandits, herdsmen, and armed robbers. Rather than deploy more security personnel and measures to protect citizens, the opposite is the case. Our security personnel are usually nowhere to be seen at the hotspots, leaving vulnerable Nigerians at the mercy of terrorists. We can all remember the Otedola Bridge explosion, which happened in June 2018, that claimed lives. Yet, tankers that are usually not roadworthy still continue to transport PMS across the country during rush hour. Very little investment is made in our education, housing, or health sector, and it shows. Most of our public schools and hospitals are so dilapidated and ill-equipped for purpose. Fake drugs flood our markets, and no provisions made for affordable housing. The average Nigerian is aware that if they rely on the government for anything, they're on a long thing. We know that the fact that we're alive today is only down to God's mercy. We have no assurance of security from our government. If we complain publicly, we may be disposed of or taken into custody by security operatives. Yet, every 4 years, we trek to the polls and cast our votes for the very same people who place no value on the Nigerian life. Some of us even selling our vote for as little as 2,000 naira. So what do? We have 2 options. We can either continue along this path or start voting the right people in and holding them accountable. Get to know our rights and fight for them. After all, what value is a life without security and freedom?
What value is a life without security? Yes, no matter how attractive the return on investment are in your country, if there is no security, nobody will put a kobo there.
Exactly.
Nobody will put a dime in that. And unfortunately, I always say this, we are very religious now. We leave everything to God, live and for God. You're traveling on the road, you're attacked by armed robbers, there is no police, like you said. There are no, even when the police come, who's protecting the police that is protecting you? His salary is not secured. The army man's salary is not secure. But yet, governments are buying cars, foreign cars. Nobody's discussing their salaries and allowances. And yet, you're talking about immunity for them. We talk about, we fight ourselves for even calling government to action. They say it's hate speech. Now you're talking of, don't even talk again. It's hate speech. Something had to give. My own is not whether we continue or whether we vote them. They should know, as a matter of fact, that if we continue on this trajectory, very soon and very soon, that Liberia, when they were telling Liberia, no, don't do this, some chief judges would give order and think that because you are up there, it won't affect you. But when the war started, even chief judges were at rehabilitation camp, refugee camp. So most of these leaders, if they don't sit down and think that they need to begin to do the right thing, when it happens, I'm sorry.
Isn't democracy the government of the people, by the people, for the people?
That's what it should be.
So at what point did we abdicate our responsibilities as a people? And at what point did we give the power within this democracy, of this democracy, to the people we have voted? You asked a question in your
Advocacy,
article.
yeah.
How do we vote the right people in? We, the people. Because it looks like the people we're electing have the power to be elected and not be elected. And even when you elect them, they have the power to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will say, you are not the one again, a day to the inauguration.
I'm pretty sure Saidu can answer you on that, because Saidu has a problem with the Constitution. And to be honest, I actually agree that it started from the Constitution.
The Constitution is not we, the people, as we have it today. It's not we, the people, that promulgate. That Constitution is not us.
It has nothing to do with
It's something that was foisted on us.
But we've had
So
the
it's
constitutional conference.
We have constitutional
And they didn't
crisis,
change
all
anything,
of
did
that.
they?
How many? It's still, those conferences are not the way a proper constitution should be constituted. You should have people voted by.
So
by
what
the
would you
communities,
want
not,
to see
not
amended?
you nominating people.
No, what would you want to see
We have to
amended
decide-
in the
we have to
Constitution?
decide. Yes, so
It's not
the
a constitutional thing.
No, I'm telling
it's
you.
a we thing.
See, the
We.
Constitution.
That's we,
Why
the
I think the
people.
Constitution is very important is because the Constitution will determine the kind of leadership, how we want to be ruled, the kind of leaders, and how the leaders we produced. All of this
Let
things
me.
be
Do we even
no,
have
wait.
goals
No, wait.
as a people?
No, wait. That's what I'm saying. That's, you see, that's where the problem is.
We don't
the
have
people
goals.
now, every year we amend the Constitution. We say American Constitution is like a pamphlet. You know, all the set of rules and laws cannot be contained in one document.
No, I tend to agree with liberals on this.
And,
It's
and
not
so
the
you
emphasis
find out
isn't
that
on
we,
changing the Constitution.
during the election, it is not the Constitution that says
You're looking for right
that
people
you
to
must
apply right people.
collect 200 or 2,000 naira to sell your vote to somebody.
It's a human being.
In our polling unit,
And hunger.
we came out and said that day we called it vote and flange job. So I coordinated. I ensured that all the people, the rich men, we went. They came out. We collected monies from them and said, we'll buy drinks here. We'll buy food.
Yeah, but the thing is...
Whether you're a poor man, whether you're a rich man, let us all come together and vote. Ensure that these votes are protected. So it was about voting. And nobody would come here and say, I want to give you 2,000 naira. How many of us did that at our various levels? Some people didn't bother voting. And then you sit down and complain.
I have to round up soon.
No, bear with me. Let me just make this point, because I haven't still thrown my 2 penny or my 2 kobo inside.
Okay,
I mean, it was fascinating when you sort of said, every time they'll come and throw out a statement, something as empty as one of the ones.
no
And
stone
even
be left
today, I
unturned.
heard on the news, it says, deal with these people mercilessly. So somebody asked the question before, Uncle, were they dealing with them mercifully? So the point is, I feel governance is a partnership. You need to hold them accountable. I know we keep using that word, and it sounds like it's a cliche. But even at the local level, you say, okay, you said that you'll do this. You haven't done it. You give them figures, because that's the only way, dealing with what we have already. Going forward, you can now start saying, how do we push the right people with conscience to the fore? But right now, what you have on the ground are people you need to hold
Yeah.
accountable.
No, I agree, but
And then
I want to
people
speak
get
for Sadie
voted,
here,
and then
actually.
the life of the people who voted in means nothing
Yeah.
to them.
But I do think that our constitution does confer certain powers
Yeah.
that prevent some people from,
Holding
facing
them
prosecution or from us holding them accountable.
But you need the right people to then
No, fair
legislate.
enough,
So
in
you-
order to turn it.
This is
All
where-
right,
which
well.
came first, the chicken
there
or the
you
egg?
go. Sometimes we ask the question to provoke some sober reflection. Here's where we look forward to reflecting on your observations on our advocacies. On Nigeria for Sale, Niger Loop Videos says, the only way, what happened to Sideways? Anyways, fair enough, it's your opinion. Nigeria is for sale, for real. Niger Loop, I know you appreciate that the only way is up is an expression of optimism. We keep looking up in the midst of our challenges. And does Nigeria need a multi-party system? Fetch says, it's a shame that no one here is debating on people's comments. Not sure what you mean, Fetch. Anyway, we just read out your comments, so feel free to follow up on this. On the Megacity Part 3, Urban Development, Comrade RSA Incorruptible says, megacities are well planned and standardized, not a dumping ground for all comers like Lagos. Do keep your comments coming in on Facebook, Plus TV Africa, hashtag TheAdvocateNG, or on Twitter and Instagram at Plus TV Africa, hashtag TheAdvocateNG. To catch up with previous broadcasts, go to www.plustvafrica.com/theadvocate. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Plus TV Africa. After the break, Treasure may be cracking open Pandora's box as she explores the causal elements behind the rising spate of husband killings. You may need to sit back for this one. 5 panelists, 5 topical issues, no holds barred.
For me, it's not knowledge that's lacking. It's that greed. It's that mentality where you feel you deserve to take your own and take it infinitely and let everybody else just manage however they will manage.
We're almost becoming hardwired to try and cheat.
I would, suggest that we begin to hold our leaders accountable.
There was a time in this country when things actually work.
I don't think that any organization should be above the law. And I think one of the challenges we have in this country is about governance across the board.
But what I'm saying is that it doesn't really affect us in Nigeria. That's really
It does.
I don't know what we can do if the system is already corrupted.
We've been warned as a continent of the influx of the Chinese. If you don't repay your debt, they will just colonize you.
Right, Uche, I didn't know I was that much of a fire starter. But simply saying what needs to be said, as we do here on The Advocates. No holds barred. Now let's look at spousal violence and financial independence for women. I think spousal women have been on the increase across the regions of Nigeria lately. I have wondered again and again why more women are killing their husbands. Although the men have also been doing the same, the statistics are alarming by the day. Social media is awash with gory tales and photos of women who've allowed rage and the thirst for vengeance to overwhelm them. I think at the root of the spousal killings is insecurity, financial and emotional insecurity. There are no figures to show that our foremothers were stronger than us. However, in their time, women were not maiming or outrightly killing their spouses this way. I feel they were generally emotionally stronger, and it cannot be because polygamy was pervasive then. Perhaps our men should do more than one wife deliberately. Don't throw stones at me yet. The truth is that the majority of them may not be able to afford keeping a home with two women in today's Nigeria. But seriously, why are postmodern women this weak nowadays? I know the betrayal from a spouse can hurt badly, can be, terrible. And yes, we do feel like a rug has been pulled from under us. Nevertheless, we must value our own lives more. We must value our future more. We must value our purpose more. Woman, you can't give the reins of your future and the power to rise above pain to a man that betrayed or hurt you. And this brings me to financial security. I think we should begin to socialize our girls into money management early in life. We must teach how to invest early in life so that our girls grow up financially and emotionally confident, financially and emotionally intelligent. Our mothers should concentrate more on strategy sessions for the bride, on how to hit the ground running as they get married. This will be more rewarding than the many trips to the markets to pick Asoebi and souvenirs. I know it's our culture, but you know, don't overdo it. Times have changed. Older women must now teach coping mechanisms for housewives and career women. Our women conferences can be more resourceful than the talk shops they are at the moment. How can more women own houses and businesses? How can they scale up and have access to loans that can help to sustain them? Look, the rhythm of the music changed a long time ago. A good strategist does things differently to get the unusual delivered. I see the wife and side chick battle raging. I read the cooking wife arguments too. But seriously, ladies, all those WhatsApp groups with no particular focus are a waste of time. Let's focus on more important things like investments and scaling up our businesses. The dynamics of today's marriages are different from those of the 80s, the 90s, or the beginning of the millennium. We are formidable, we are smart, we are resilient. So let's start to deploy our energies to being stronger emotionally and financially. These spousal killings just must stop. Let them stop because we are wiser and stronger together.
Sorry,
I
jumped
think
in
it
so
has,
quickly,
it
but no,
has
let me,
less,
I'm going to
far less to do with financial independence.
Exactly.
I think so, because
I was going to come in on that one. That I think maybe emotional, but not really financial, because from what I can even see today, many women are the breadwinners now. They're the breadwinners of their homes.
Not even emotional.
So I'm looking at it and I'm
marriage.
thinking, so what really is the, because even when you look at the what will I call it? The range, the different levels of the women doing this. It's not just in a particular class. There's a lawyer that killed her husband. There's, you know, some people are just nutty. I don't even know how to describe it. But, it goes across a spectrum. So I think more it's about emotional stability or emotional maturity or whatever you want to call it. Because our mothers, like you mentioned, our mothers were more resilient. Whenever their husbands were messing up or whatever, they took their mind away from the husband and focused on the children. Exactly. But here, now, today, and I know what Liberals will say, look, the Western people brought in this thing. It's not for me,
but
anyway, let me not speak for you.
It's more of, that's my idea. It's more of a rating of marriage, really, and what marriage is. You see, there are some persons who would do far better, well, if they were not forced into marriages.
Thank you.
You see, the society these days, a girl, once you are 20, 25, your parents are, oh, where are the men? And then you see some people are in church praying for life partner, wherever he is, release devil, release him for me.
Enemies release, devil release.
Yes, and meanwhile, and then you see some who are doing well, they have the capacity to live well, buy houses, and buy beautiful cars. They say, if you have all of these things, no man will come. And so you have this societal hangover of the husband crowns the woman. And then the woman keeps herself waiting for that man, and then you marry a Tokumbo man, and the problem starts. Because all your expectation of what marriage is, it's completely destroyed from the beginning. And so we need to begin to change all of those ideas about, look, you can be whoever you want to be without marrying if you must. I can decide to have children. I have a friend, his father had four of them, no wife, and they all came out excellently well. But there are some people also in the same vein who will have 4 children they can't take care of, and it's fight every day. I'm not saying don't get married, but if you're going into marriage, there should be understanding. You should know what it is. And then some people would, lastly, so that I can yield the floor for Ikene,
thank you.
I hear them, actually.
And then there are some. Imagine a woman. This one is not a first wife. The wife number 2, you know that there was a first wife before they married you. And it is the wife number 2 now that is jealous that eventually killed the man. You know,
no, but Liberos, let's even bring in, what about the 4 women that raped their husband to death because he was only focusing on one wife? And then the rest of the wives said, nah, you can't carry on doing this. We're going to all do you to death. And they did him to death. So again, you know, it's not even really about whether you're a second wife, whatever. There has to be some emotional maturity before you go into marriage. Also, maybe we now need to start teaching people anger management, because I don't know why people are getting to that point where they don't know
that
to walk
boiling point.
away.
I did an advocacy, I think, some time ago about, you know, values. That getting into marriage, it has to be people that have shared values, because these are 2 people with different values, different baggages coming into a union. And sometimes you get to that point where you can't, your coping mechanism is stretched to a point where anger and other things, you know, come out. So you need to understand your partner, whoever you're choosing. You need to do some offloading, understanding, you know, knowing that, you know, we're not all perfect, and you need to adapt to certain things, you know, believe it, because they say what you tell yourself is what becomes eventually becomes, you know. So in marriage, you need to, how do I say, you know that equation that they say 1 + 1 is 2 in marriage, 1 + 1 is always 1. So once you've made up your mind that, look, this thing is going to work, you begin to find excuse for your spouse. Things don't, because like NLP, they say nothing means anything except the meanings.
I mean, I'll take it from
so
what
when you give
said.
empowering meanings, you know, to situations, you find that your marriage would tend to work.
Sorry, Libos, let me just throw in my cover. Thank you, sir. And what I was going to say was, when I look at marriage, because she mentioned her 4 mothers, and I remember my mother, my mom's mom, she used to call my granddad Namuku, which is like my lord. There's a certain expectation. She was powerful in the home, but she knew her own space. I'm not saying we should go back to that, but I think expectations somehow were caught between the world that used to be and, you know, the social media world, what we think we should be. And so there's a lot of conflict going on in the minds of women. So a lot of times they feel abused and robbed. And then, like you're saying, you and your partner are not even on the same plane. Somehow your caveman husband didn't get the memo that you're seeing yourself as, you know, I don't know, Hollywood wife. So we need to sort of sync it up. And then I still feel that sometimes when you talk about financial independence, because I know someone who was advocating for that, it's almost like you're living in two people living in the home, but side by side. You're not competing with your husband. So there still needs to be that understanding that in as much as you're financially independent, you can still run a common account and various things together. And then someone else came recently, just to quickly give another illustration. She was saying, oh, Nigerian women who are successful, I'm addressing you. She's a friend of mine who's been on this program, so she'll probably hear this. You know, I'm addressing you. Don't go and marry Nigerians. You're not destined to marry a Nigerian man. Look for Igbo, you who are outwardly thinking, who are more progressive, who won't hold you down, so you won't be frustrated. And I said to her, no, because you can still find Nigerian men who, if they love you enough, they'll keep up with whatever your aspirations are. So love is, for me, the language that transcends all of this. And if you take love out of marriage, you don't have to marry. It's not by force.
Okay, for me, I think our women, Nigerian women, should just get it once and for all. When you marry, that man does not take over everything about you. So then he buys you everything. And you seem to not have a life or a mind of your own anymore. So when when anything happens between both of you, you then feel like your life is over, and how you're going to move on. Okay, I'm just going to kill you.
Yep, you promised and you certainly delivered, Treasure. No holds barred. After the break, we'll be keeping it frank and perhaps a little feisty. No promises though.
5 panelists, 5 topical issues, no holds barred.
For me, it's not knowledge that's lacking. It's that greed. It's that mentality where you feel you deserve to take your own and take it infinitely and let everybody else just manage however they will manage.
We're almost becoming hardwired to try and cheat.
I would, suggest that we begin to hold our leaders accountable.
There was a time in this country when things actually work.
I don't think that any organization should be above the law. And I think one of the challenges we have in this country is about governance across the board.
What I'm saying is that it doesn't really affect us in Nigeria. That's
I don't know what we can do if the system is already corrupted.
We've been warned as a continent of the influx of the Chinese. If you don't repay your debt, they will just colonize you.
Ndi bany, ana m ekene unu. None. When the options are clearly pointed out to you, making the right choice isn't exactly rocket science. So I'll be talking about living culture, dead culture. Your children do not speak Igbo. Shame on you, was the pious exclamation of a colleague once in reaction to my honest, unapologetic response to her inquiry. I wondered why I should be ashamed for a crime I didn't know I committed. What was the crime, and why must it be approached from the point of view of a crime committed anyway? Sometimes we treat culture as though it's a mark of righteousness, a stamp of an elite group of belonging, thereby shutting the door on those who do not share our rituals. Not so. Culture is meant to be inclusive and relevant to everyday life. It's not a relic to be propped up. We're all for promoting culture and even ensuring the longevity of our mother tongue. However, let's not neglect to acknowledge the truth that culture must be organic, an expression of a life being lived in the present continuous tense. It can also be an evolving shared experience arrived at by a conscious or unconscious consensus to preserve that shared experience. Therefore, for our children to speak Igbo or Hausa or Yoruba, we must naturally or even artificially create the relevance and need for the language. Trips to the village, get together with family members that speak the language. Of course, we too must speak the language at home. Some may say, why does culture matter? Why should I speak in my mother tongue? For the individual, not only does language and a shared culture expose them to a layered identity and a sense of obligation to a wider community, this in a world that is increasingly self-centered. Culture brings perspective by broadening the vocabulary by which the individual may assimilate and even interrogate life. You could compare it with the option of enjoying a rich variety buffet versus the same set menu every day of the week, 52 weeks in the year, for the rest of your life. I know what I would choose. Recently, I read about how a traditional ruler of a certain Nigerian town interrupted what was said to be the mob justice of a woman supposedly caught in adultery, as the townspeople asserted that her first son was not the legitimate offspring of her husband, now dead. They were poised to make her swear and undergo some ritualistic form of adjudication when the wise ruler blocks their moves by stating simply that what was required was a DNA test to settle the matter, pure and simple. You could say that particular culture had reached its point of transition. Nigeria is blessed with a rich buffet of cultures and languages. As a people, we must be prepared to preserve the old, but to do so with an eye on the evolving state of affairs. We must be part of a living cultural revolution, or else vainly hold on to a dead relic. It's as simple as that.
So, you know.
Yes.
So, but really, like you said, culture evolves. That's why even in law, when a culture, it's that sometimes you see the culture is barbaric. There are 3 tests for a culture for it to become, relevant in law. Is it repugnant to natural justice, equity, and good conscience? Is it contrary to public policy? And I can't readily remember the 3rd one now. And so there are some of our cultures, like that culture that you were talking about, is not only repugnant to natural justice, it's also, contrary to public policy.
The ruler was actually a lawyer.
Exactly, and so that's why he had to use those validity tests. We call it validity test, for a culture. So some of these cultures were cultures that, we practiced those days when, there were no, technology to actually test this thing. It's like even some of our adage that 1,000 holes and cutlasses cannot break down a rock. And I tell you, just put one dynamite, it will bring it down.
That's my favorite thing to do.
But then for language, it's very important. Sometimes we are also not unmindful of the fact that it should play a very important role. But the world we live in today, our mother tongue, whether we like it or not, is English. We interact in English every day. We do businesses with English. And so sometimes you find your default mode. You speak English at home. And then in some cases, intermarriages, we marry from outside of our tribe. And then that conscious effort to speak your language to your children is not there. And that's why you see some tribe will tell you, no, you must marry from home because they want to preserve that language. And, but for some of us, it's not, we try to make conscious effort to speak it to our children, even give them the name, so that they'll have that identity. But we are losing it. And the earlier we also try to remember and take it back, take those parts that are good and retain them and marry them with modernity, the better for all of us.
I
Absolutely.
think culture, right, it's identity, and we must guide it jealously. I agree that there are some repugnant
Yes.
ones that we should, do away with, but we should not lose that identity. Over time, with the advent of internet and social media, there are some culture that young guys today will tell you is not cool, but it's our culture, it's our identity, it's us as a people, and it's a story we must continue to tell ourselves. Paint our culture positively so that our kids would push those culture. Otherwise, because now, if you'd ask me, over time, you notice there's this thing about the white and the black person. It's fashionable now to be light-skinned because, you tend to associate light skin to beauty.
European version.
What happened to the
Or
black
Caucasian.
beauty, the African Nubian that was like sought after in those days? It's a narrative, it's a story we tell ourselves, and we need to begin to change that. We need to preserve our culture because the only thing we can bequeath to our children. And we should not allow this external influence to take that away from us.
Yeah. You see, I can see why the friend of yours castigated you, really, because, it's not I'm saying she's right, but I can see where she was coming from, because unfortunately, we don't seem to place enough emphasis on retaining or teaching our kids our language. And unfortunately, every time we lose culture, our own culture, we then gain the Western culture. It's not like we're losing it and then we're gaining something better. We drop that and then we now take on somebody else's culture that doesn't actually quite fit with our background or the way we are. Culture, language, definitely, for me, is vital, because language is about identity. It also gives self-esteem. It makes you feel
Connects you to
proud.
other people.
Yeah, and I mean, why? If you lose your language, then what is to tell anybody that you are from here and the other person is from there? Because when you lose your language, you also lose other things that come with language. See, there's so many proverbs that my mom used to tell me about in Igbo. I can't even say them now. Why? Because I've lost that side of myself. So I really think it's important that we protect our culture to a degree. Yes.
Even the reason I even brought up my friend very quickly, because I want to hear, is that it's not so much that I don't want my children to speak Igbo. Is that the approach of making you feel as if you're a criminal for nothing? That's not the approach. You need to understand that the child is being exposed. So to preserve that culture, the approach should be, let's keep them in a world where it's natural for them to see the relevance of. It's not an artificial.
I can see why the person attacked you.
Because attacking me won't
maybe not you, but you see the problem
and
is
I would attack
before
somebody.
it was was the done thing to when you come back from wherever you start speaking it's all over the place, and people even recognize that and thought, it elevates you above. So in her mind, she's looking at you being unapologetic about the fact that your children don't speak your language.
Because it'd be like slamming women for wearing weave on. If you make the Nubian look more attractive, then they will, you don't go and be attacking people about their life.
I am more of a doer than a talker. And this...
Or talk nadu.
Nadu. And this is so important to me that I did a book on my childhood.
Excellent.
And documented the culture, the Yoruba culture that I was socialized to. In that book, you find songs, you find folk tales, you find the
recipes,
intangible
everything.
part, food. You find the intangible and the tangible parts of that culture in that book. Because, look, you speak it to the children. It doesn't end with the language.
There's more to it.
Is this song in that book?
There are songs.
Olurombi or Jem.
I don't know, there are quite a lot of them. I have also
need to bring it when next you come.
I have Eledi Jife. A lot of our
So
children
what is
don't
culture
even know
to you?
what-
I want to know.
Culture to me, just as you said, is your identity. I'm a speech coach. I teach, English as a second language, to second language speakers of the English. But you see, I will still speak my language and even my dialect. I will still tell proverbs, use proverbs as I speak. Even when I'm speaking English, I love Chinua Achebe because the way he transliterated the proverbs.
That's why I said
you will still feel the Igbo.
Exactly.
In those
Yes.
That's why I said
those
they
proverbs.
will have to. You can't do away with one. There had to be a fusion of the two. And that's why you find out that some of those
evolving.
writers, You know, they will have they find a way of intertwining
yeah.
Yes.
the language with English.
You're right.
That is the burden of globalization.
Even Nnamdi Azikiwe
We have
used
to
to do it.
Yeah.
If I can't see the
Because
queen,
they are
then I better Nambe.
And you know
Sorry,
what
I
I
have to wrap
like
it up.
about
We've come to the
culture
end of
and
our
why
time.
we must preserve ours, no matter how strong this globalization pull is on us. The Indians will still do their namaste, even if they find themselves at Chatham House. The Italians.
What about the
so-
Chinese?
Yeah, the
All of them.
Chinese.
Even the
all of
Spanish.
them. You know, so we
Latino.
must
The French.
Okay.
ours.
Thank you, everybody. All we can do is set out our stall. The real conversation takes off from here. So keep your comments coming in on our Facebook page, Plus TV Africa, hashtag #TheAdvocateNG, or on Twitter and Instagram at Plus TV Africa, hashtag #TheAdvocateNG. To catch up with previous broadcasts, go to www.plustvafrica.com/theadvocate. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Plus TV Africa. We look forward to making a date with you this time next week, same channel. But till then, let's keep advocating for a better society. Day one.
Puyaka.
Say, Anjama.
Okilako.
5 panelists, 5 topical issues, no holds barred.
For me, it's not knowledge that's lacking. It's that greed. It's that mentality where you feel you deserve to take your own and take it infinitely and let everybody else just manage however they will manage.
We're almost becoming hardwired to try and cheat.
I would, suggest that we begin to hold our leaders accountable.
There was a time in this country when things actually work.
I don't think that any organization should be above the law. And I think one of the challenges we have in this country is about governance across the board.
What I'm saying is that it doesn't really affect us in Nigeria. That's really
It does.
I don't know what we can do if the system is already corrupted.
We've been warned as a continent of the influx of the Chinese. If you don't repay your debt, they will just colonize you.
Emeka Ihedioha loses once again as the Supreme Court has refused to restore him as the governor of Imo State. And the Kaduna State Governor, Nasir El-Rufai, says no to any possibility of amnesty and negotiations with bandits in the state. This is Plus Politics, and I am Felicity Ezewike. You're welcome. Now, the Supreme Court, in a decision by a panel of justices led by Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Tanko Muhammad, has reiterated the judgment it gave on January 14, which declared Hope Uzodinma of the All Progressive Congress APC as the legally elected governor of Imo State. The Apex Court stated that there is no constitutional provision for setting aside an earlier Supreme Court judgment and that the verdict of the Supreme Court is a finality. Joining us to have a conversation on this via telephone is legal practitioner Raymond Nkanebe. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Felicity, for this opportunity.
Straight up, there were missed expectations to what the Supreme Court would do with this very seemingly novel situation. What was your expectations before this ruling, and what is your reaction now as we have a ruling?
Thank you very much. My expectation was that the Supreme Court would have used the rare opportunity to redeem itself in its decision over the Imo State's gubernatorial election. Unfortunately, with what we are hearing today, the court has refused to enter that very rare moment of glory. But for the dissenting judgment of one of the judges that sat in the panel. I mean, Justice Chima Sentus Nweze. For me, he is the person who has given a judgment that accords with the popular will of the people of Imo State, who filed out on the 9th of March 2019 to vote for Governor Emeka Ihedioha.
Let me interject here and ask you about that particular dissenting voice of Justice Nweze. Now, he is saying that there was need for the Supreme Court to review its position. When you juxtapose that to the other 6 justices who said that, I mean, they cannot review a decision of the Supreme Court, of what relevance is his position in the larger scheme of things now?
Well, unfortunately, a dissenting judgment is not the judgment of the court. The rule or the principle is that however articulate, profound, or erudite a dissenting judgment may be, it does not form the opinion of the court. Be that as it may, dissenting judgments, as we have seen in our jurisprudence, have always been it has always led to a departure or helped to build the jurisprudence in subsequent cases. So whereas the other 6 judges have refused to bow to the principle of finality of the court decision without adverting its mind to circumstances whereby they can depart from those decisions, what Nweze has shown is that justice must be done at all times, even though the heavens may fall.
I mean, going forward, what will history be saying about this case? We'll come to some other questions that are coming up, but what will history be saying about this case? This is the Supreme Court. To the layman, it is the final bus stop when it comes to legal matters and the quest for justice. We have this seemingly final decision that doesn't look like it is final from where I'm standing, a lot of Nigerians as well.
Well, it's very, very, very unfortunate. Like I told you, I thought the court would have used the opportunity of this application to redeem itself. Unfortunately, the court has refused to seize that opportunity. I've felt the pulse of Nigerians, and the popular opinion is that the current judiciary, as led by Justice Tanko Mohammed, has not quite been the kind of judiciary that you would expect in a nascent democracy as ours. But be that as it may, we hope that in subsequent cases, the Supreme Court will also have the opportunity to depart from this decision, because one of the accepted instances where the court can do that is where such a case comes before it again, and then the court will now have the opportunity, this time within its appellate jurisdiction, to now depart from that decision.
Let me ask you this question, just for those that might have missed the point. You seem not to be very happy with the decision of the Supreme Court. Could you take us down memory lane and explain the reasons why this review was called for in the first place?
Okay, the review was called for against the backdrop of the fact that the judgment of the court on the 14th of January seem not to accord with verifiable facts and the principle of elections. What am I trying to say? The number of votes that the Supreme Court returned for Hope Uzodinma, after adding the votes from the so-called 388 polling units, exceeded the total number of accredited voters. Now, in the principle of elections, it does not stand to reason that total votes cast should exceed total accredited voters. That is outright fallacy, right? Secondly, Section 179, subsection 2 of our Constitution provides that before a person can be returned as the winner of an election, he must have scored the total number of lawful votes cast, and also 1/4 of the votes cast in 2/3 majority of the state. Now, Imo State has 27 local governments. 2/3 of 27 local governments is 18 local government areas. Hope Uzodinma did not win up to 18 number of local government areas. So what is the basis for returning him? Thirdly, having added the votes from the so-called 388 polling units, the Supreme Court did not consider it fit to now assess the spread of these votes against the number of local governments in Imo State. Having not done all of this, the Supreme Court could not have endorsed a lawful or a valid return of Hope Uzodinma. So it was against this backdrop that Emeka Ihedioha and his lawyers felt they should go back to the court and point out this fact to them so that they may be impelled to take a second look at their decision and now correct some of these jurisprudential flaws. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has said they're not going to do that because by being the final court of the land, they cannot be heard or seen going back or sitting on appeal over its own decisions.
So it basically means, if I understand you, it basically means that the court did not review the case as presented, but just dismissed it outright.
They didn't. And in my, if I might say this, in an opinion I wrote last week, what I said, it is not a must that the Supreme Court, after making this review, must return Emeka Ihedioha. It will be sufficient if the court could further justify the decision it entered on the 14th of January. You understand? But the Supreme Court has failed to do either of these, preferring to rely on the argument of technicality. That is to say, being the final court, it cannot be heard or seen reviewing its own decision. Very unfortunate.
On the flip side of this conversation, you and I agree that the Supreme Court is the final court in the land. Let's look at it from their position as well. Is it safe to say that before now, the questions has been, if this review is allowed to go through, it's going to open a floodgate of more questions and more review of the Supreme Court decision. Wouldn't that cause chaos in the land when the final court is no longer the final court?
Well, for me, that is quite a technical argument. Now, let me concede that the Supreme Court is the final court of the land by virtue of the provision of Section 235 of the 1999 Constitution. But the Supreme Court rules, Order 8, Rule 16 of the Supreme Court rules, has given it the inherent powers to review its decision on a number of grounds. That is to say, where the judgment was procured by fraud or deceit, where the judgment was procured by misrepresentation of facts, right? In such a situation, an aggrieved party who goes back to the court, the Supreme Court is entitled to look at it again. Now, the circumstances of this case is a clear case of misrepresentation of facts, which the Supreme Court ought to have looked at. So it is not a question of whether to open the floodgate or not. It is a question of justice, and justice, being a social value, must at all times be recognized by that court. Justice must always be done and seem to be done.
Okay, I think I'll give a rest to that and just ask you, what are the lessons, or should I say, this whole situation seems to be a sore point or a learning curve for the Nigerian judiciary. What would you say to that?
I agree absolutely. Like I made reference to an article I wrote last week, and I recommended that this situation is born out of the fact that our Supreme Court is very, very, very overburdened. That court is the most overburdened court throughout the whole world. You have few number of judges doing the work arising from every part of this country. Hello?
Yes, I'm with you.
So I believe what is happening today, while we are having judgments which do not look like judgments of Supreme Court, is because the manpower of that court is seriously deficit. So I believe it's time has come for us to increase the number of judges of that court so that they can be properly equipped to do serious legal work over matters that come to them. You understand? So I think this is what this case has shown us, and the National Assembly might want to amend the Constitution to increase the maximum number of judges of that court. As of today, the Constitution says the court should not have not more than 21 justices. I think the number of cases in the country at this time is enough for that court to have at least 40 judges. Understand? If we can expand the number of judges of that court, we can leverage on this manpower to do serious legal work. But even beyond that, I think the time has come for our judges to adopt a very activist disposition, because our democracy is still a very evolving one. So you need judges who are what we call creative judges, who should have an eye for the reality on ground in the society and use their judgment, their vantage points as judges or final judges to effect some of the social change which has been lacking in this country for a long time.
All right. What do you foretell that the history book will say about this whole scenario, this whole development, this whole debate about the supremacy of the Supreme Court? What do you foretell the history book will say?
Well, I don't think the history would be, if for anything, the history would be that at some point in Nigeria's history, the Supreme Court refused to act like what a Supreme Court would act like. Though we have seen this court in a number of cases act in that fashion, like we saw in the case of Amechi vs. Wike in 2007, where the court rose up and stamped out impunity at that time. But I believe, unfortunately, the step the court has taken in recent years have not been quite what you would expect from a Supreme Court. So I believe this should be a moment of personal reflection for the court to look back at its glory days and see how it can bring back the book of those days.
All right, let me just, this one is, what are the next steps now that the drama seems to have screeched to a halt? Whether we like it or not, there is a finality to the decision of the Supreme Court as announced today. So now that it has screeched to a halt, what are the next steps?
The thing there is, I must commend former Governor Emeka Ihedioha, who throughout the period of this legal battle have conducted himself in a very, like a true Democrat, whom he is. Have watched his language throughout this. He has always spoken in a very civil tone and demeanor. I think he will, in the next few hours, he's going to address his supporters, telling them to accept this as the ultimate will of God, so that we can have peace and stability in Imo State. You understand? He's still quite a young politician. Tomorrow he can still give his shot at the leadership of that state. And for Mr. Hope Uzodinma,
yes, I was going to ask you, what would be the task before him now that he can breathe a sign of relief that there will be no further litigation to his position, rather, as the governor of the state?
Yes. Well, I will hope he is going to toe the path of the man in Bayelsa State, Governor Doyediri, who, conscious of how he came to power, you understand, has treaded in a very civil and peaceful manner, trying to call all parties to shift their swords and come together to work to build the state. Since at the end of the day, what matters is the interest of the people of that state. So I'll expect Hope Uzodinma to also speak in that manner, call persons from the PDP to come together and let them see how they can build and develop Imo State. Because at the end of the day, what is at stake here is not who rules the Imo State, but the welfare of people of that state.
All right, before I allow you go on this segment of the program, I'd like to ask about the projects that were embarked upon by the very short tenure of Emeka Ihedioha. I personally saw some myself when I visited the state briefly last month. Will there be a conclusion Or will we see a case of abandoned projects in Imo State?
That would depend much on Hope Uzodima's governance, how he wants to go about governance in that state. But I don't think, in terms of infrastructure, there is little Ihedioha has actually done. You understand? He has actually commenced to. I don't think there will be a clear case of projects who are almost 50% done being abandoned. So I hope Hope Uzodima will also try to continue some of these projects to avoid this incidence of abandoned projects all over the place.
I want to thank you very much for your time with us this evening.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right, we'll take a short break now, and when we return, Kaduna State Governor talks tough against bandits in his state. Just stay with us.
Almost every Nigerian wants to leave the country, but do they understand what it means to be a global citizen?
The reason why people were leaving Nigeria 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and even until now, is essentially because they want to survive. Movement is a human duty, right? You have to move. Part of the biggest problem in Nigeria is we produce what we don't consume, and we consume what we don't produce. There's no economy in the world that can survive on that equation. The idea of running away to another country, undocumented, hiding, compromising your dignity, take baser positions in those societies, marry people you hate, hibernate all your life, dwarf your most important dreams and aspirations, take a compromise in the name of the pursuit of economics, embrace toil, otherwise called hustle, and lose your meaning and your purpose totally. You will play the majority game pretending to be happy, but you'll be sad and miserable for the rest of your life. So my goal, my thinking is that instead of thinking relocation, we should think penetration.
The Kaduna State Governor, Nasir El-Rufai, has expressed zero tolerance for bandits, as he stated that the Kaduna State government will not give amnesty to bandits, nor will they negotiate with them. He also apologized to the people of the state over the recent attacks in 3 local government areas in which scores of people were killed. I will be having a guest join us via telephone in a bit, security expert. But before he does, let's take a look at this video.
Weeks after gunmen attacked Bakali village in Giwa local government of Kaduna State, killing 13 family members and 8 others. There was another fresh attack on Kerewa, Ngwa Musa, and Zariyawa community in Igabi and Giwa local government of the state. Over 50 persons lost their lives. Sorrow and tears pervaded the atmosphere as many of the residents were seen mourning for their dead and loved ones. The governor of Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai, visited the affected communities to mourn with those in pain, arriving after a mass burial in company of security officials. Governor El-Rufai assured residents that those found culpable will not go unpunished.
In Kaduna State, we have zero tolerance for bandits. We don't give them amnesty. We don't negotiate with them. We have asked the security agencies to just wipe them out.
He, however, asked for the forgiveness of the residents for failing to protect them from the hands of criminals and improving in the security situation in the state.
The responsibility for protecting these people rests squarely on my shoulders and that of my colleagues. I also came to apologize for our failure to fully protect them. We are doing the best we can, and we are hoping that this banditry will end.
Idong Joseph, Plus TV, Africa.
The situation with banditry is a worrying one. I have with me in the studio political analyst Lulu Elegbe. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
Good evening. And we also have joining us via telephone, like I intimated you before now, Peter Aigbedion. He is a security expert. Thank you very much for joining us, Peter.
Thank you, Felicity. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. All right. The governor is saying there is zero tolerance for banditry in the state. But I want us to start the conversation by clearing up what that banditry actually means. Because a councillor in a local government, a local councillor in that state, spoke to Voice of America and said his words, and I quote, these killers are Boko Haram. They stormed our village, killing indiscriminately. They spared no one, the young, the old, even the Amajiris were not spared. I want us to clear the narrative. Are these bandits or Boko Haram insurgents, do you think? I ask because it completely changes the conversation about whether amnesty comes into the scenario.
Yeah, so I think it's, again, for me, it's one of these issues that I think it's a false narrative, because when we start to say that the people that carried out these attacks are bandits, I think it almost takes away from the seriousness of the situation, because these aren't bandits, these are terrorists. I don't know whether or not they're Boko Haram, but any group of people that comes into a village or comes into a town and kills people on the kind of scale that we're talking about, that's not banditry. That's terrorism. There's no other word for it. It's not, we're not talking, I mean, when you talk about banditry, this thing started, banditry, you're thinking about bootlegging in the 20s in the US, that sort of thing. This is not the kind of thing we're talking about here. We're talking about people that go almost undisturbed, are able to go into towns heavily armed, killing innocent men, women, children. So when we start to say that these are bandits, no, they're not. I don't know if they're Boko Haram, but the treatment of the federal government or the state governments or the security agencies generally, the way they should handle this is the way in which you'd handle any other terrorist atrocity going on in the country.
We'll come to you on that, but let's bring Peter in and get his perspective on this. Are they bandits or are these terrorists? Because the narrative is seemingly being watered down when people coming and kill in the manner that we saw in Kaduna State.
I agree that the scale on which we're witnessing this bloodletting is one that makes us it would be remiss of us to use any other word apart from terrorism. This is pure, sheer, unadulterated terrorism. If you can attack and kill 50 people, and I heard that there were over 100 of them that rode into the town over the course of the night and the early morning, and they carried out these attacks for over 2 hours and moved on like they did. The modus operandi is similar to that of Boko Haram. Boko Haram has not come out to claim responsibility, but 2 + 2 is still 4. And from what we can tell, this was premeditated. It was not accidental. But from what I've heard as well, they carried out these attacks as reprisal on the communities for aiding the military in their operations against them. So I believe that definitely this is not just the act of a group of bandits. This is organized crime of the highest level, and their lawlessness is on a scale that is. I mean, it's not unprecedented, but it's heartrending. 50 lives, one life is too much to lose. How much more 50 lives? So I don't like that government is trying to water that marriage by just claiming bandits. It gives the rest of the country a belief that, like we have seen before, or seen sentiments of that nature, that they are deliberately watching this thing down because it is a tribal or a religious war.
Okay, so the both of you seem to agree that the word bandits or banditry waters down the gravity of the brutality of the attack. So when you now bring into the conversation the fact that the governor is saying that he's not going to get into amnesty with these bandits, you take it back to the fact that there is already a bill in the Senate providing for the rehabilitation of repentant Boko Haram terrorists. Doesn't that invalidate the position of the Kaduna State government?
Well, it depends on how you look at it, because first of all, I think the main thing to remember is really that they're not calling these guys terrorists. They're not calling them Boko Haram members. They're calling them
How do you
bandits.
distinguish?
That's my point, and I think that's Peter's point as well. If you look at the way Boko Haram has operated in the last few years, they go into towns in numbers, they carry out these attacks and they disappear, and somewhere down the line the security agencies turn up. That's exactly what's happened here. So even if you're not going to say that, even if you're not willing to say that, okay, these are definitely Boko Haram people, at the very least, these are terrorists. So when you talk about the bill in the Senate at the moment, talking about amnesty and rehabilitation, I get that everywhere in the world that has an issue with terrorism, you don't defeat, because terrorism is a mindset. It goes beyond the violence. There's a mindset attached to it. So the simple meaning of that is you can't defeat terrorism with only military force. It doesn't work because of the mindset. So there has to be the softer human angle, which is where the de-radicalization program comes in. Now, the problem with this is, the problem with the way it's been implemented, based on what I've seen of the bill in the Senate, is it has language that almost seems like you are rewarding these people for the things they've done. Someone asked me recently, how is that different from the amnesty for Niger Delta militants? I said they're two completely different things. Niger Delta militants weren't killing indiscriminately this way. They were agitating for improvements in their communities because of what had happened with oil. And what they were doing was blowing up pipelines more than they were doing anything else. Yes, they carried out kidnappings and things like that, but these guys are going into towns and wiping out entire families. That's something completely different. It's not the same thing.
Okay, let's look at some of the issues on the ground that was raised basically from the visit of the governor. He said something about the communication strategy. Peter, I'm coming to you now. He said that there was poor GSM network connection in that area. If I'm to get him right, he said the security agencies are doing the best they can, but they find it difficult to get to remote areas in good time to make a prompt intervention. 50 people died because of this lack of communication. Is there something wrong? Because a whole lot of money has been expended in ensuring that military gets the best equipment, communication gadgets to ensure that they're able to communicate. Aren't there other ways in the 21st century that information can pass through to the military in order to stop this situation from occurring?
Let me take it piece by piece. First of all, I think the governor, for him to have come out to make that statement, I wouldn't give him much credence or lend credence to what he has said, because I've not heard it from the military commanders. I've not heard any of the military or police spokesmen come out to say something of that nature. Maybe he may be privileged to see some reports that give him that belief, but I mean, it is my knowledge, and I want to say this with the most respect for his office. I believe it is ridiculous. Here's another reason. You have a Navy fleet that goes into deep waters where GSM networks do not really work well. Yet they're able to communicate for miles and miles far away from different ships and different naval assets. and there's no GSM mast within those regions. Secondly, and this is where I want to talk about strategy. If you look at it, this is asymmetrical warfare. We understand, and if we've seen that this community is cooperating with the military and giving them reports about the insurgents looking around the area, it would have been the wise thing to do to at least provide some measure of protection, a buffer, to prevent this from happening the way it happened. For this to happen, and with over hours and hours, nothing was done. Nobody. I understand the governor said that some of the security agencies came in to mitigate what was happening. But in the first place, they should have realized that the possibility of reprisal attacks being carried out against communities that were helpful was high. Again, it also shows that intelligence is leaking from within the security system. Because if the insurgents are attacking the communities for helping the military, then that means that there's information from inside the military that's leaking as well. There are moves within the system that are also communicating this information to the terrorists. So I'm concerned that the governor is handling this matter with thick gloves, and his tone, from what he's saying, he's not being generous with the truth. That's what I'll say.
Okay, let's look at the much publicized apology to the people of Kaduna State, heartfelt one at that, for his inability to actually protect them, which is his primary responsibility, and adds to the condolence by the presidency to the people of that state, and the promise that they will beef up security. We'll come to that, or they will implement more strategies. We'll come to that in a bit. But isn't it time that the narrative on when we have violence like this go beyond commiserating with the people that lost a family, admitting faults, to situations where we can have a scenario where we don't have this violence in the first instance, and then the government comes and say, this is what we did. These are the people who've apprehended. We saved 50 lives.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It goes back to what I keep saying, that the reason a lot of these things happen is a lack of consequences. Because if you ask how many terrorists or bandits have been arrested in the last 12 months, how many have you heard of that have been arrested? How many have you heard of that have been prosecuted? How many have you heard of that have been jailed? I can't even remember any. They probably are, but I cannot remember. So when you have a situation when people know that they can do things like this and get away with it, there's no disincentive for them. So when the government comes out and says, we condemn the statement, issues apologies, that's all well and good. But the reality is that for the victims, it feels hollow, because every time this happens, you hear a statement of condemnation. And these days, unfortunately, it doesn't mean much anymore. That's because that town that has been attacked, or those villages that have been attacked,
previously,
they are not. No, even these particular ones. Yes, security will probably be beefed up there in the next few days, few weeks. But if the military leaves there tomorrow, or if they leave there next week, those people are still vulnerable to another attack. So it's not a question of apologizing, or if you go after the people that are committing. And what I've never understood is why it's so hard, it's so difficult to apprehend these people, because in some cases they are coming into these towns in convoys. And if you remember, the northeast, even though Kaduna is northwest, but many of these areas are some of the most militarized regions in the country. So when you have convoys of trucks, of motorbikes, of different cars heading in one direction, where do you think they're going? Where are they going from? So I think it sort of goes back to this issue of state policing and community policing, because to be fair to the military, they are stretched, and they're in different parts of the country carrying out different tasks. So they need that intelligence. The only way they can get that is through community policing. You can't do it. You can't get it any other way.
Okay, I want to squeeze in this question to Peter before we have to wrap things up. And it's a reaction from a former senator, that's Shehu Sani, who happens to be from that area, from the north. He is unhappy with the killings and has attacked northern governors for what he said. And I'm going to read what he said. He said, playing the ostrich, afraid of confronting the federal government and taking independent action to protect their people. End of quote. In this case, how would they go about this without shattering the seeming working cordial relationship between the executive and the state governors?
Well, I want to look at it from what the governor has said. He has taken responsibility for this. Typically, if you were serious about this, I remember a time in this country where state of emergency was imposed on Plateau State, and the bloodletting was not even close to what we're experiencing on this scale. Typically, I would suggest the federal government should use a state of emergency to certain areas in this theater of madness or what that's going on. But knowing the way these things have been handled with political undertones, probably will not happen. I don't know that there's a way that this matter will be treated other than being treated with consequences where there's error and there's the likelihood that leads to loss of lives like this. One life lost is too much of a price for any human being to pay. We stop politicizing these issues. I believe it's within the federal government to do what they're doing, but there should be consequences. People have been clamoring for months for the strategy to change, for the heads of the service chiefs to be either rotated or to be removed outrightly. I believe we're losing people every day. It's not just people on the civilian side. We're losing people in the army, people who are in the military. General Baba died a few weeks ago. There are people who are sacrificing their lives, and is a price too heavy, too expensive for their families and for the country in general. The government should step up, do what is needful. Technology is also available. These areas, I mean, we have allies in security, other countries who are willing to give us security assets like drones, man-on-man, to fly by these regions, to be able to give hour-by-hour reports on what's going on. Even our Nigerian Air Force can fly sorties over the region. So I believe government should do what is important to do and stop treating this matter with kid gloves. All
right, Peter, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
And of course, Lulu, thank you very much for making it on time.
Thanks.
Pleasure to have you. All right, and thank you for staying with us, but we're not done yet. We'll take our plots reports now, and when we return, I'll be giving my take. To stay with us.
About 25 repented Boko Haram insurgents, along with their wives and children, have been received in Maiduguri by the Borno State Commissioner for Women Affairs, Hajiya Zuwaira Gambo, on behalf of the state government. They landed in Maiduguri International Airport with military aircraft and headed to Bulunkutu Rehabilitation Center. Handing over the repented insurgents, the coordinator of the Safe Corridor Program, Major General Bamidele Shafa, said the former insurgents will be well rehabilitated by the federal government and also encouraged other insurgents in the bush to surrender.
Open hand to drop their weapons and embrace peace for the betterment of all of us.